Welcome to the Prepared School Psych Podcast, your resource for student success. I'm Jenny Ponzurek, your host and guide, drawing from over 2 decades of experience as a school psychologist, presenter, and consultant. Join me as we explore practical strategies and insights from educational experts. From evidence-based approaches to real-world challenges, we are here to support you. Whether you're a school psychologist seeking new tools, a teacher in search of effective strategies, or a special education director eager to support your team, this podcast is here to provide you with the resources you need. And as we journey together, I have a special offer just for you, our dedicated listeners. Get exclusive access to a free 2-week trial of the Prepared School Psych community. Experience on-demand resources, mini courses where you can earn CEUs, and access to me and my content specialist through a variety of methods to answer your questions. Head over to jennyponzurek.com/podcast now and use the code podcast at checkout. That's podcast, all caps, for your 2-week trial. Information about this free offer can also be found in the show notes. Come and be a part of our supportive community. We would love to have you. Now, tune in and get prepared. Welcome to the Prepared School Psych Podcast. All right, welcome everyone to another episode. Today I have Gagan Shergill, who is a travel school psychologist with SPG Therapy and Education. He received his specialist level training in school psychology at Cal State University, Sacramento. He currently serves as the chair of the AI Ethics Ad Hoc Committee of the California Association of School Psychologists. He is passionate about improving the educational experiences of culturally and linguistically diverse students, very passionate about non-biased assessment and the integration of technology in practice. Outside of school psychology, he enjoys writing, cooking, practicing martial arts, and of course, hanging out with ChatGPT. I am so eager to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate this.
Well, most important question we're asking all of our guests right now, because everyone always wants to know, what is your favorite TV show that you are watching right now?
So, it's been a while since I've watched through like a TV show. The last one that I watched that I really liked was Andor on Disney Plus. I don't know if you're familiar with it. A huge Star Wars fan.
I have a Star Wars household. Yes, I am
perfect. Yeah.
very,
So
very familiar.
right? Yeah, this one's fantastic. There's a plot for this one that's very unique in Star Wars. So it's great. I've really enjoyed Andor.
Awesome. I'm glad someone else notices that sometimes there's a lack of plot in some of the
Yes. Their costume budgets are always pretty extensive, but the plot budget sometimes not there.
Well, in one sentence, how would your colleagues describe you as a school psychologist?
I think my closest colleagues would probably say that I'm a bit wonkish, a little bit wonky about school psychology.
Okay, you're going to have to describe that. Yes.
I'm very passionate about my interest in school psychology, and I sort of let it be known to those around me. So I can be very, very intense about my interest in school psychology at times. I think my kinder colleagues, though, would say I'm a very collaborative and solutions-oriented person. So we'll stick with that.
I like those. I like those words. All right. Well, how long have you been a school psychologist? And at what point in your journey did you become interested in or kind of focused on artificial intelligence?
Okay, so right now, if we're counting internship, then it's my 3rd year of practice. For not my 2nd year of practice, I feel like post-pandemic psychologists should get like at least 2 years of surface credit for every year. So 5 years, we'll round up to there. But I really started becoming interested in, we have to go way back, like technology in general around high school. And, when I was younger, we couldn't really afford like fancy computers or phones or things like that. And so when I got into high school, I started working and I finally had enough income that I can buy used computers or phones and things like that. And I kind of got my start with like technology, with like rooting and installing ROMs on my phone. So basically like replacing the software that was on there and like putting my own software on there and kind of messing around with it. and I wrecked a lot of phones in the process. I learned how like computers worked, and it really got me introduced with the open source community, which is plays a pivotal role in AI development right now. But it's just a group of people who are really interested in it and like software development, and they put out guides on how to do it. They develop the software themselves. And so, I kind of became enamored with this idea that I can get this like gadget to do essentially whatever I wanted, right? And that was pretty empowering for me. With AI specifically, this kind of goes back in my like first year after internship, my first year of practice. And this was really when GPT-3 came out. And, when it got released, some of my students were already starting to use it, right? They were using it to get tutoring, essentially, to just to talk to, kind of build that relationship with. Some were using it for like less savory purposes. They were making deep fakes of like other students and staff. And that was sort of like a Pandora's box moment for me, right? Like this was going to change how students are interacting with each other, how they learn, how we as practitioners need to be evaluating them and kind of addressing some of their needs. And so I started going into the literature and seeing if there's anything written about it. And as a field, we haven't really explored this topic of like human computer interactions around like what artificial intelligence is. And so I wrote this paper for Communique called The School Psychologist and the Machine to really kind of help myself understand like some of the parameters about like what this is right now, but also to kind of talk about what are some of the benefits and the limitations, and then what are some of the ethical implications, and kind of pointing out that there really isn't that much guidance on how to use this technology in our practice, and that kind of continues today. And then, yeah, that kind of takes me today where I'm working with the California Association of School Psychologists. Like you mentioned, I'm the chair for their ad hoc committee on AI ethics. And we're really focused on that question right now. How do we provide guidance for practitioners to ethically implement AI? We want to take more of like a cautiously optimistic approach with AI. We know people are already interested, they're already using it. So it's just a matter of guiding our energies toward a path we can all agree on is what we're working on right now.
Love that. Well, talk to me a little bit more about specifically the use of AI for school psychologists.
Okay. So one of the main ways that we've seen practitioners use AI is really in report writing. And
Mhm.
that's not surprising, right? It's sort of like the touchstone of our field. Everybody has to do it at some point, and there's an aspect of report writing that even if you love doing assessment like I do, I love evaluating, I love part of that like nobody likes doing, right? Like for me, it's writing the interviews. I hate doing that. So this with AI, it's sort of a natural fit. It can really synthesize large sources of data and connect disparate sources of information together in kind of like new and kind of surprising ways, right? What's been interesting, there's been kind of this discussion lately about practitioners pointing out that we've already had technology like this before, like with Click Report or like Q Global, for instance. You get the interpretive reports on the BASC or the WISC. But the key difference, though, and I think the important distinction between what AI does and what those previous iterations did, with AI, it's the responses are uniquely generated each time. And
Mm.
so you get a new interpretation on your data every single time. And that
Oh,
has some benefits, right? You can get some very nice tailored responses to the data that you're presenting. Whereas on score reports, you're going to get the exact same output every time, right? A T-score of a 50 is going to be a T-score of a 50, and 80 is going to be an 80. The responses don't change. And there's some trade-offs. So with that traditional approach, you get very consistent, reliable responses that have been formulated by experts, right? By the companies themselves. But they're often pretty dense and generic. They don't necessarily apply to everybody. A parent is not going to look at that and say, like, wow, I really understand my kid now after reading the BASC report. With AI, you can prompt the model to get responses. For instance, one of the ways that I really like to use it is to tailor responses to be more strengths-based, to be at like a comprehension level that's a little bit lower grade level, to really meet students where they're at. So for example, like if I want, my student has a strength in visual spatial skills and they really like Minecraft, I can prompt the AI model to say, give me an example of a strength that the student might have who's really interested in Minecraft, and put it at the fifth grade level. And it might say something like, when you're playing Minecraft, you might be able to picture the house in your head before you make it in real life. Or,
mm.
you've got a really great strength. That's your superpower. When you see those responses, they have what are like higher face validity. On the surface, they look better, they sound better. A parent's going to like that more, a kid's going to like that more. The downside, though, is that AI has that tendency to make things up,
Yes.
especially when it doesn't know, right? And when you try and connect things that don't really go together, it will give you a response no matter what. It won't say like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Sorry about that. Or I'm not sure if
Mhm.
it's an accurate way of interpreting this data. Sorry about that. There's no external reference point for it to pull from. And so you as a practitioner, you need to vet all those outputs. And that's that tendency to make things up. It's just one of the many things to be concerned about with integrating AI in our practice. And we can kind of get into that, but I'll pause there for now.
Well, and I think that's interesting. I know going to a legal workshop a couple of months ago on
Mhm.
this topic, one of the terms that the attorney used that kind of stuck in my head is AI is going to give you a plausible
Yeah.
answer. It might not be a factual answer. And so I guess I never really thought about that with your example. It made me think about, I talk a lot about learning disabilities. We always want to make
Mhm.
sure that whatever processing area we found, helps to explain that academic
Yeah.
area. But if I pose that question to ChatGPT, for example, or any of these different ones, and I might throw out something that I know, for instance, doesn't have a connection, like
Mhm.
phonemic awareness and math calculation, right? They have nothing to do with one another. But if I ask ChatGPT, how does this help explain this? It's
Mhm.
going to give me it's not going to say that actually doesn't make any sense, Jenny.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the models, they want to be people pleasers, right? They are trained to give humans helpful responses.
Oh,
Like an example, like I had ChatGPT try and generate accommodations that might fit on a 504 plan for a student with attention difficulties. And one of the suggestions was, oh, you should allow like use of fidgets in the classroom.
mhm.
And then, I decided to be mean to the model, right? And I prompted it and I said, like, well, no, that doesn't go in there. Like that should really belong on an IEP plan. That can't go on a 504. And then that can go on a 504, right? That's no
Right.
problem. But ChatGPT said, like, oh yeah, you're totally right. Like, I'm sorry about that, my mistake. It belongs on a 504, like an IEP plan. Here's the law that it's citing for you. Like it's trying to make it more sounding more official, essentially. So if you're not careful, you can prompt these models to give you your confirmation bias for whatever you're trying to get from the model. It will
Mhm.
feed you that information. If you're not careful, right, it'll lead you astray, especially when we're interpreting our data.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, I know this is a big topic. There's a lot of Facebook groups out there about AI in our field. Some school psychs are like really interested in it, and some of them are so afraid of it. Like they
Yeah.
won't even like open it up. They've never even tried it out. What advice would you give to a psych who wants to use AI for efficiency purposes? I think it's one of the wonderful benefits that it can help
Mhm.
with, but they still want to stay within ethical guidelines that we don't kind of sort of have yet. How do
Mhm.
we how do we play that game?
Okay. So, like you mentioned, right? Right now, there are no ethical guidelines from most of our major professional organizations. APA is working on a revision for their code of ethics. NASP has convened like a work group to like make some revisions, and they've published some resource articles. CAS recently put out a resource. We were very careful not to provide necessarily ethical guidelines, just ethical ways of thinking about AI, because we're taking more of this ground up approach where we're trying to understand from practitioners how they're using AI and then going from there, providing guidance from there. So we want to meet people where they're at. So first, I would say like more help is coming soon, right? It's
Okay, good.
organizations move slow, so we're no exception. But we want to take a careful approach with this. And part of the challenge is the technology develops so quickly. There's new applications being discovered. There's new ways of implementing it into your practice being discovered. So we can't really keep up that quickly. But in the interim, like in the lacuna, in the deficit of information that we have, I would recommend that if you're really interested in trying it out in your practice, treat the model like you would an intern, right? Like a very overzealous intern. They're really excited about everything, but they don't know what they're getting themselves into. So what I mean by that is first is your AI model, right? Your AI intern, it really likes to gossip. So you have to assume that all the sensitive data that you're telling your intern, it's going to go to the principal, it's going to go to the teacher, it's going to go to the student, it's going to the parent, go to the parent's dog. Like everybody's going to hear about it. And so you want to make sure that whatever you're putting in there, and if you don't want that information disclosed to somebody else, you're not going to verbally tell that to somebody, don't tell it to the model, right? You want to remove all that personally identifiable information at a minimum. We also need the platforms that we're using to also safeguard that information too. But that's a different conversation. We do want to make sure that all of our data is secure with the tools that we're using. But on your end as a practitioner, you have that ethical obligation to remove that personally identifiable information and protect student confidentiality. The second tip, though, is that your AI intern, it's starting to get pretty good at generating reports, right? Just like interns second semester, they're getting a little bit, getting confident at it, they're getting good, still a little rough around the edges. It tends to make up information. And it doesn't necessarily understand what needs to go into a legally defensible report. You, as a practitioner, you know what goes into that report. The model doesn't. The model will give you what you want, essentially. It'll give you the outline, the shape of a report, essentially. So you need to read, review, and edit your intern's report before you sign off on them. There's no, even in the future, these models will get fantastic. There's no way we're just going to, hit submit to the model and then hit send to the parents, right? You always have to review those outputs because you have that student professional relationship. The model does not have that relationship with your student. They have no obligation to provide factual information, but you as a practitioner, you do.
Hey everyone, just a quick minute of your time to tell you about something coming up. Summer Boot Camp 2024 has been scheduled, and we are looking forward to seeing you virtually from July 8th through the 19th. If you are new to Summer Boot Camp, it is 2 weeks of professional development with some Q&A sessions to help answer all of your lingering questions. Whether you're starting your internship this fall, your first year in this field, or your 20th year, we have sessions for you. This summer, I am unveiling my IEP report card, a way for you to self-reflect and determine what is working and what areas are in need of some growth. We have resources all over the IEP report card, and to help you with those areas in need of growth, we have 12 professional development sessions over 2 weeks. Now, if you can't make the sessions live because you're actually going to enjoy your summer, no worries as we record everything. If you need some CEUs or a certificate of completion, we have those too. So head over to my website at jennyponzerg.com today, or click on the link in the show notes to learn all about the sessions we are offering. I will see you in July.
The third tip there is that your AI intern also has some pretty fresh ideas on interventions. People using it for generating accommodations and developing IEP goals. Those interventions, though, they might not always be evidence-based. They might be what's popular, right? What gets talked about the most. How these models are developed they basically turn words into math. You are making associations between what frequently occurs. So if certain keywords frequently occur together, the model thinks that those are probably important. They are more likely to generate a more valid response, right? And so we know that oftentimes things that are scientifically based don't necessarily become popular because they're popular things are popular, but not necessarily scientifically based. And so you as a practitioner have to make sure that those recommendations that you're making are evidence-based. The other part of that, though, is it might also recommend things that you're not familiar with. So, it's recommending DBT, for instance, and you have no idea what DBT is. And you put that in your report, the student needs DBT, right? It's your responsibility as a practitioner to make sure that you know those interventions that you're writing into your reports. If not, seeking training for those interventions before you're writing about that, at least to be able to speak about what are some of the pros of this intervention, the cons, the contraindications. It doesn't fit for everybody, right?
Right.
And then finally, your intern has some baggage. It goes out on the weekends, comes to work, kind of hallucinates, makes things up. It tends to be biased, frequently biased, and it has a very strong case of people-pleasing tendency. It wants to tell you that you're correct about everything, that you have the best report, there's no data missing, everything looks great. And as a supervisor, you can't fall for that flattery, right? You have to cut through all of that, vet all the outputs, and correct your intern when it veers off course. There's research that kind of suggests that the best kind of output that you can get from these AI models isn't from the first response. It's when you have a conversation with it. They're called chatbots for a reason. And so when you get into that second, third iteration and you start correcting the model, when you save that information in that specific session, then the model knows to pull from that information in the future. So it won't make those mistakes nearly as often. But you want to have that conversation with it. Don't accept the first output that it gives you.
Interesting. So many different things. I'm just thinking back the couple of ways that I have used it, and I'm like, oh, I need to keep going. I've been using it a lot when I'm struggling with figuring out how to explain it in a more parent-friendly way. A lot of us have so much amazing knowledge, but we have so much jargon attached in our field. And so sometimes I'll just throw in a couple of sentences, no student data or anything like that, and just be like, how do I make this a little bit more parent friendly? But now I
Yeah.
know if I don't like that first response, I can, hey, let's do a little bit better here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, you can prompt these models to be better, right? There's some tips out there, there's a lot of prompt guides, like schools like AI has one. Claude recently released one from like learning how to like write effective prompts. There's some research that it's kind of interesting. The nicer that you are to the model, the better responses that you get. If you say please and thank you, you'll get good responses. Early on, if you tip the model, like if you say, give me the best response, I'll tip you $500, there was evidence that it gave you better responses. So there's a lot of quirks with the model, but playing around with it, right? Getting that conversation going, that's where you're
Mhm.
going to get the best responses.
Interesting. Well, where do you see AI in the field of school psychology 5 years from now?
Okay. Yeah. So I think that my hope is that we can arrive at the point that we can see AI as useful for freeing us up from some of those low value practices and become like an adjunct to our services. So by low value practices, I mean those practices that are really just kind of time sinks and they provide little direct tangible benefits to students. Things like report writing, responding to emails, documenting services, filling out paperwork for compliance. Those things are important. They make somebody very happy when they happen, but they don't necessarily have that direct benefit to students. Their values are always indirect. So, for example, like with report writing, I write reports to be able to qualify students for services. But my report was just a vehicle to get them there. I might write the best recommendations, the best narrative, no matter what it is. The real value lies in when they actually start receiving those services. They get benefit from it. I can't just put my report down, put it in front of the kid and be like, well, kid, you're in luck today. I've put my best recommendations in here. Go on, take it, be well, right? I can't do that.
Right.
So the report's just a vehicle. And I think that school psychologists are so much more skilled in that. We can spend our time providing those services to students, things like counseling groups, executive functioning interventions, consultation. We need to be out there working directly with students and families. And so I think once AI helps us to free up some of that time, it can begin and once we have a little bit more research on it, it can become an adjunct to our services. Just some examples that I've been thinking about are ways we might be able to integrate in our practice. So I might use like an image generation AI. So like ChatGPT you can prompt the model to generate images. You can in the pretty near future, they're releasing a model where you can generate videos too. I might use that in art therapy with students. For my students with motor impairments or students who might be a little bit perfectionist, they can prompt the model and get an output that represents something about their emotions that they wouldn't otherwise be able to draw for themselves. I might use something like character.ai, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the platform, but it's basically like chat models that are trained to act like certain characters, like cartoon characters, or
Right.
like you can get one like of SpongeBob, like whoever it is, and do like social skills training with my students. I can prompt the model to put them through certain scenarios that I'm monitoring, I'm watching. They have more buy-in in that situation, and then we can generalize those skills into the classroom environment. And then same thing like there's some research that suggests that these models are actually pretty good therapists, and that might be scary.
Yeah.
But where that kind of fits in. Right now, as a profession, we're not able to meet all the needs of students that are out there. And then the converse of that, though, is that most students don't actually need a licensed or a credentialed practitioner who's been trained to be able to provide certain levels of services. Our tier one students might just need somebody to check in with. They just need somebody to quickly talk to, and that's kind of it. And their needs are met. And so I might set up like a chatbot model to work with students who just need somebody to check in with. And I can focus my time on planning those tier two, tier three services for students who need those services that are managed by someone who's credentialed, someone who's licensed. One thing I recently put on my Instagram was there's an interesting model called HeyGen, and it's a video-based model, and you can generate videos and translate it and interpret it into like different languages in real time. So,
Wow.
I might record like my feedback sessions to parents, and then they can have it interpreted to their languages that they speak in real time. They can play it back, listen to it again. So there's so many different ways that we could use these models to supplement our services to help like expand our reach as practitioners and ultimately our impact for students. I think that once we kind of break from this paradigm of just test in place or report right in place, we can have so much more real world benefit for students.
Well, and that leads me to my next questions because some school psychs, and I remember this happened when like MTSS came about. There was this
Yeah.
big concern that we would no longer need school psychologists, right? Because MTSS was going to fix all the learning disabilities, and therefore we wouldn't need to be evaluating all these students. And lo and behold, we're all still here. So there's a lot of concern that AI, school psychs won't be needed, our field won't be needed.
Yeah.
But what will AI never be able to replace about this field?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two answers to this question, and one's kind of dependent on the other, right? So the first is that, like you kind of already mentioned, developments in the field, new paradigms, new ways of service delivery, new technologies, they're always going to cause disruption. And people are going to adapt to those disruptions. For example, like, did the introduction of WebMD destroy the field of medicine? Like, no, it didn't. On the contrary, we need more nurses, more doctors, more physicians' assistants. What it did do, though, was it provided information to patients so they can become more informed consumers of those services. It also incentivized individuals to come see the doctor so they can get confirmation for their diagnosis, they can get treatment. We know from research that people are not the most accurate self-diagnosers. You're not the best at knowing yourself in some circumstances. There's actually an interesting study by Liu and colleagues, I think from some researchers out of China, as well as Dartmouth University in 2017. And it found that when people came to their doctor's offices with a pre-existing self-diagnosis, they kind of knew what their diagnosis was, and their doctor's diagnosis differed from that, they were less likely to trust their doctors. But do you know what was the only thing that moderated that relationship? So kind of changes so that they were more likely to trust their doctors. It was just the quality of the relationship that they had with the doctor beforehand. So that quality of that
Makes
pre-existing
sense.
relationship, that
Yeah.
trust, that rapport, it's the same thing in psychological research. Even beyond the therapeutic modality that you take, if you do CBT, you do DBT, whatever it is, like horse therapy, the trust and the rapport that you have with your client explains more of the treatment outcomes than does the approach that you take.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the key elements, that trust, that rapport, no matter how charming AI models get, that they can't fully replace. That trust rapport, I would also argue that ability to motivate too, right? It's one
Mm.
thing to know the information, to prompt the model to get some good advice. It's another thing to actually put that in place. And we know that change work is very difficult. And so that trust, that rapport, that motivation that we can provide, those are things that it can't replace. The second part, though, so we have to earn that trust and for our students or families or teachers, right? I think that begins with providing services. So helping them to resolve some of those real world challenges that they have so they begin to trust, develop that trust and that rapport with us. I think AI will help to free up some of that time for us to do that, but it's up to us as practitioners, as in the field, to capitalize on those opportunities that we're presented with.
Well, for school psychs who want to kind of dip their toe, right? We know some people just jumped in the pool, but for
Yeah.
those people who haven't done anything yet, but they just want to dip that toe in the water of AI, what are some actionable steps that they can take?
Okay, so I have three steps for them. So the first is just to learn about AI, right? You become less anxious about things, you become less worried about things once you have some familiarity with it. So there's a lot of free resources out there, like Microsoft, Google, LinkedIn Learning. They all have courses specifically meant for learning about AI, its development, how you can kind of get started with it, what are some tips for using it. You can go through that route. I really like podcasts. So in addition to your podcast, right? You can listen to, there's a lot of technology podcasts. I like the Hard Fork podcast from the New York Times. It's not really specifically focused on AI, but it covers like technology developments in general. And it gives you, most of the time they're covering AI. And so it's a really great informative way, an easy way to kind of get your feet wet into
Mhm.
like the world of AI. If there was a book that people wanted to read, I would recommend The Alignment Problem by Brian Christian. It's a little bit older. It's well, older in like relative terms compared to in technology times. It's ancient, but it came out in 2020. But it covers the development of AI and like how as a field it's developed, and it does it in a very approachable manner. It's kind of like not a cut and dry history. It's interviews with people who worked on key technologies that kind of led to where we are right now. And it's called the alignment problem because alignment really refers to this concept in like machine learning and AI of basically like getting machines to do what we want and getting them not to do what we don't want. And
Yeah.
so What they've kind of found out along the way is that these models are unexpectedly biased. That was something that has been kind of talked about in machine learning for years and years and decades. And there's very smart people who are kind of working on addressing those problems. But this book kind of gives you an introduction into what those issues are, so you can begin to think about it within your own practice, how that
Mhm.
might apply to the work that you're doing. Definitely recommend that book. So first step, long step, learning about AI. First
Yeah.
step. The second one is just to start small. Don't bite off more than you can chew. And if you don't want to use AI, you really don't have to. You're not going to become Fred Flintstone, like, yabba dabba doing your way across the world. Like, you'll be okay if you don't want to use it. But if you do want to try it, right? Starting small is how I'm currently using AI with my own practice. I would recommend that if they want to begin testing out its capabilities for like report writing, for instance, just start with a small section of your report, maybe just the interview data. And starting with that small piece, it'll let you do two things. It'll give you a sense of what AI can and can't do. You might not like the responses that you get back from it. Importantly, though, it'll let you catch those errors that are generated. Because no matter what kind of data you put in, it's going to generate errors. It might be pronoun errors, it might be factual, it might be interpretive errors. You starting with that small section will give you a chance to understand what's generated. And then the last tip would be just to explore widely. There's a lot of platforms out there where you can sink a lot of money into. So you can spend like $20 here, $20 here, $20 here. It kind of adds up, right? There's a lot of free platforms as well too. Start from there, start small, but explore different models. Each one has its own personality, different tasks that they assign. Like for instance, I use ChatGPT for like more general purpose, like inquiries for like synthesizing data. I use Perplexity instead of like Google search when I want to like search something and I want like a reference for that data. It can also search like academic literature too, so it's really great for that. And then there's like Claude as well, and that's really good for like putting things in tables. So each one can kind of specializes in things that it does really well. So play around, see what you like the best. So yeah, learn about it, start small, explore widely.
I like that. And I like for, school psych teams who
Mhm.
maybe might be interested together, you yourself might not have to explore all these different platforms on your own. But if groups decided, hey, we're going to try out this one, you guys try out that one, maybe come back together at an upcoming job alike meeting and kind of show off, it kind of accelerates that learning a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of great like active Facebook groups out there that have been kind of like talking about AI. You can join some of those groups and just like learn from other people's experiences as they kind of like explore AI in their own practice as well. We don't have to all reinvent the wheel at the same time. People have been playing around with it. They've been trying it out in new creative ways, and then just take what you like from there, right? I think starting with the learning though, it'll give you a sense of what are some things to watch out for with AI, like the bias, the generation of false information,
Yeah.
and then the data protection concerns. You want to keep those in mind always. You have that ethical obligation to do so. Getting past that, once you've learned about it a little bit more, then you can kind of get creative and explore with it.
Like that. Well, reflecting back to when you were a first year school psychologist, I know we always have a lot of newer school psychs and students who listen to this podcast. What
Yeah.
advice would you give to someone who's kind of starting out their career?
I mean, luckily, I don't have to like think back too far. Just a couple of years ago. I think that just to bring your passions into the field, I think there's a tendency for early career school psychologists to leave out all the things that they've learned before they became school psychologists and only bring in what was relevant, right? Like I was an RBT before, I was a para before, and I'll bring that experience, but my experience working in customer service, that doesn't matter. And I think that stems from this desire to feel or appear professional, but that also comes at the cost of being authentic with your own presentation, your own experiences. Those are valuable. Like for example, like my interest in like tinkering around with electronics, it's not really relevant to my day-to-day work, right? Like no
Mhm.
one's going to be happy that I installed a new software on my phone versus writing a report. It's not
Right.
going to fly. But by bringing that interest into the field, I've been able to find something with AI to allows me to be more authentic and kind of enhances my work and my passion for it. I would really love to see education as a whole, maybe graduate training programs, let students know that it's okay to have those passions, those experiences outside the field, and then give them the time and space to be creative with it. That's the only way that fields move forward is when we have creative ideas and we bring in things from disparate sources.
Right. Right. I love that. Well, this podcast is called The Prepared School
Mhm.
Psychologist. When you think of that word prepared, what do you do to help yourself feel more prepared in your role?
Yeah. So being a early career, I am constantly battling with the imposter syndrome. So something that is never cured, I hear. So I think that's something that has helped with that and helped with my approach to my work is just being curious about things where I can approach, questions that I don't know or situations that I can't really handle on my own, not necessarily as like a failure on my own level of competence or my knowledge, but as opportunities to be curious and seek out those who do know the answers, right? I think that part of being prepared is to have a plan for addressing those unknowns in your work. And I think that planning to be curious is the perfect remedy for that.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all of your amazing knowledge. You shared a number of resources during our conversation today, so I'll be sure to get some of those links so that we can add those into the show notes for anyone who's interested in the books and the different websites and articles that you were referencing. So thank you so much for being here today with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That concludes another episode of the Prepared School Psych podcast. And I hope today's discussion equipped you not just with knowledge, but also the confidence to take action. Remember, every conversation we have and every resource we share builds a bridge towards a more inclusive and empowering learning landscape for our students. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more insightful conversations and resources to support your journey. Share this podcast with colleagues. We would love it if you would also rate and review the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Just a reminder, everyone, the information and advice provided in this podcast are for guidance purposes only, and all listeners are required to follow both federal and state law and their own school district guidelines and policies. Thank you.